The best garden is going to be the one that you enjoy. So in today's video, I'm going to show you some basics of garden design. I think one of the first things to consider when you're starting to plan out your garden is, what is your life like? This is true of any kind of design. What is your life like? Really sit down and think about how much time you have for maintenance in the garden. Do you have kids? Do you have pets? What do you like to do outside? What do you want your garden to be and do for you? Do you want a vegetable patch? Do you want to be spending time deadheading roses? Do you want things that you can just sort of set and forget? What is your schedule like? What does your life look like? Do you like having a little, dinner party outside? Do you like sitting around a little fire pit with your kids? What does your life look like? Really write these things down. They're going to be really, really important as you're building the structure of your garden. Hi, baby. I think Georgie's going to join us. Come here, you want to come sit with me? So for example, we have Georgie. She is our one-eyed rescue pup. She's blind. She's a little bit deaf. And what this means is that we need a little space for her to move around. And I want to have some lawn for her to really be able to walk around by herself. But we also needed a fenced area because we live in an area with some predators. And so we wanted to make sure she was nice and safe. We have some coyotes on the mountain. So just making sure that she's nice and safe. She's never out there by herself. She's always with us. Just things like that. What does your space require of you? What do you need in your space? She's had enough of us. So that's going to be your foundation. That's going to be your starting point. What do you want from the garden? What's the weather like? Do you like being outside in warm weather? Do you get a lot of rain? Do you live in a place that's mostly snow? Think about the way that you engage with your, the outside environment right now, and think about ways in which you want to engage with the outside environment. Think about your time, your schedule, just really think about your life. That's the foundation. Problems are your friends. When you have limitations, when you have problem areas, this is what really stimulates our imagination and our creativity. And that's really what gardening is all about. You are painting with moving colors. So if you really think about it, that any garden problem can be turned into an incredible garden design, that's really when you're going to start to flow with your ideas. So some of the garden problems that you might face. We are in a deciduous woodland, which means that for the entire growing year, a lot of our garden is in shade. Now, fortunately, the little strip that we've decided to really plant up the most is in sun. And that's because that was our driveway, and we cut into the driveway about 50 feet in order to create the long borders that we wanted for our cottage garden. Now, what did this mean? This meant that we were going to be creating a garden in really undesirable conditions, right? This soil is non-existent. It's just gravel, and it's really compact over years and years and years of use. But the good news is there are a lot of plants that thrive in those conditions. Nepeta has done so well here, Persian catmint. Other perennials like sedum and Russian sage really thrive in those kinds of environments. They don't like rich soil. They don't like a lot of nutrients. They just kind of want to be left alone. In another area of our garden, just a hop and a skip away from that, is our dining garden. And in that area, we have lots of shade and different levels of shade. Light shade to medium shade to really dense full shade. And so in that area, it's really about figuring out what I kind of want the feel to be. There are tons of really beautiful plants that we can plant over there. Things like hostas, Hakanakloa, lots of forest grasses are beautiful in that type of environment. What kind of color did I want to invite? Maybe some peaceful colors. Certain hydrangeas could do really well in some of those light conditions. But one thing I've realized from living here is that you can test. If you like a plant enough, you can kind of test the limits with it. Some of the sun-loving plants that we have are doing so well in shadier locations. So give it a try. That's the thing with gardening. So often people think that you create a garden, you design it, and then it's done. But that couldn't be farther from the truth. It's a growing, malleable palette, and you are the painter. And what you have to do is just pay attention to it. Oh, this plant doesn't like it here. Let's try it over here. This isn't doing very well. Let's try it over in this space. So it's just really about paying attention, being present with your plants, and then shifting things around as need be. Your garden is never done. And I don't want you to think that just because you've killed a few things, you're labeling yourself as having a black thumb. If you fall down that trap, it's going to be very, very easy for you to get discouraged and then give up. But just trust me, this is part of the process of learning your environment, learning your garden, and learning what you like. It can be a little bit overwhelming when you're starting to plan your garden because you can think about the acidity in the soil, what your climate is like, what's your growing zone, what plants will thrive there, what is the exposure like in your area. And you can just sort of get bombarded by these ideas and start to feel a little overwhelmed. So one way to sort of begin is to say, all of the plants aside, while we're in these winter months, let's just think about the general structure of the garden, because you will always be able to find plants that fit your space. So let's just think about the general concepts of garden design and then how to structure your space. Typically, your garden centers will be carrying plants that are going to survive in your growing zone, but sometimes that's not the case. I, for example, live on the side of a mountain, so some of the things that are in the zone for the garden center nearby might not survive here. pH can range very drastically depending on where you are. But before you go out and get a pH kit or start to test your sun exposure, just take a moment to really think about your garden space and what you want from it. Now, the funny thing about garden design is that a lot of people see a cottage style garden, which there's a lot going on. There's so many things, there's so many layers, there's so much visual interest. And they think, oh, I could never do that. That seems really complex. That seems really challenging. And then they see something like a formal garden, which is very clean lines, very structured, maybe a lot of boxwood, maybe a lot of monocultures, and they think, oh, that looks a lot easier. When in fact, something that's really rigid, if you think about the way nature is, if we look outside and look at parks and just nature as our foundation for understanding the way that these things work, we don't often find that severe structure, that level of precision in the wild. In the wild, things pop up. They just flourish. There's abundance. There's the unexpected. So if you want to plan a garden that's easier to maintain, you actually want to steer clear of things that are very, very formal. Those are going to be the things that require more maintenance in order to look that clean and precise all the time. Whereas a cottage garden, things are going to self-seed, things are going to pop up that you didn't expect. But there's so much going on, there's so much interest, and there's so much ground cover. If you're planting things so close together, that weeds are really not going to be a problem. You're not going to have to be out there weeding. You're not going to have to be out there manicuring and shaping things really precisely. Because if things get a little bit scruffy, if things, get a little bit unkempt, it doesn't stand out as much. Things can kind of bleed into the background. It does allow for a little bit more ease, a little bit more freedom in terms of the pruners and in terms of the kind of maintenance that you're going to have to do. Whereas, the other formal gardens, which are so beautiful, and I think they can just be incredibly fascinating and inspiring places, are also there. That precision takes a lot of your time and a lot of the maintenance. It doesn't have to be huge. I'm not suggesting that if you wanted to have a formal garden, you'd have to be a professional gardener who's out there all the time. Not at all. But just something to consider. Do you want to be spending maybe an hour every single week maintaining your garden, or do you want to maybe just do it whenever you get the chance? It's really kind of about figuring out what your lifestyle is like and then finding a garden that fits that. The other thing to consider is an area for the utilitarian aspects of gardening. In a cottage garden, it's very much a combination, this sort of amalgamation of utilitarian and aesthetic. These two things kind of blending together. So you have, your edibles and your ornamentals growing side by side. A watering can sat out next to a ladder leaning against the cottage with cosmos and foxgloves blooming all around fits very nicely into a cottage garden setting. Whereas that doesn't fit as well into something like a formal garden. So you just want to kind of think about those things. Where do you want your compost heap? I think that a compost heap can look incredibly beautiful if designed correctly. So if you have more of that cottage garden style, you're really drawn to English gardens, making your own compost heap out of old branches, or you could do willows or hazel boughs woven together, things like that can be a great way of creating a very aesthetic and beautiful compost heap. You want to always keep your compost heap far away from your home. So our compost heap is really far away on the other side of our property, but we also have another kind of garden compost, which isn't any of our food waste. It's just garden waste and grass clippings and things like that and leaves that we put fairly close to our house. And that way in the spring, we can use that as mulch for our garden. But when you have your compost really close to your house, especially if you eat meat and things like that, then it's going to draw certain critters to your house that you're not going to want near your house and you're not going to want near your garden. But I think it's always important to think about a place for you, a place for wildlife, a place for food, and a place for utility. So this could be different segments in different rooms, or you could have a winding path of a cottage garden and you have your compost in the back and you have a greenhouse maybe over here and the path kind of leads through, and maybe you have a wildlife pond in the back section, and then let's say you have a little lawned area over here for your kids to play in. So you want to think about these different aspects, and then in a cottage garden you can plant all of your vegetables and all of the beautiful flowers side by side with each other. So I think a lot of us just have a general kind of rectangular backyard. That's a very standard thing, at least in the United States, that we have, is just a standard kind of rectangular back garden area. So now I'm just going to show you some basic garden design. So we'll switch the angle here and I'll just do a little bit of a garden design for that very bog standard kind of backyard garden. And I'm going to show you 3 ways that you can sort of design this depending on your life and how you want to do this. So let's take our little rectangle here. And you do not have to be good at drawing in order to design your garden. So let's just say you have a very standard backyard, rectangular. Let's say your house sits like that. So this is your backyard rectangle. And now maybe your door is right in the center. It's more interesting and more fun if you have a little bit of a problem. So if the door was maybe off to the side or over here, or maybe you had to enter to the back garden from the side of the house like that. Things like that can actually be blessings in disguise. But let's say you have a center, everything is very symmetrical. So the first one, the standard garden design landscaping, is to just have plants around the perimeter. So filling all of this in with plants. So this is the sort of standard garden design, filling all of this in with plants. And, maybe you'll have some beautiful shrubs and some perennials in the front. So let's say you have shallow borders following this rectangular shape. This rectangular shape, again, is just accentuating the fact that it's just a big, broad rectangle in the back. There's very little interest here. There's very little dimension. It's a picture frame around a lawn. So what you might want to do instead is to create little areas and pockets of interest. So let's do a second option. Same backyard, second option. So for this one here, same rectangular backyard. The house is here. And let's say the entrance is right in the center there. So this is the entrance to the backyard. Let's say, based on your lifestyle, you really want to have a table where you can host and be outside amongst nature. Let's put our table right here. So this is close enough to the house that it's easy to bring things out when you're serving. So you have your little table here. Then let's say you have a dog or maybe some kids and you want a lawn area, or maybe you just like to play some lawn games. So let's put a little lawn right here. Then let's say you really want to have a vegetable patch. That's just something you've always wanted, is a little area that looks like a typical vegetable patch that you want to have your edibles. So let's put your vegetable patch back here. And let's say this yard is not very big. I'm putting it at, let's say 40 by 60, 30 by 60, maybe something like that. So here's your little vegetable patch. This is a container or something of interest in the center. Maybe it's even a little fountain, who knows? So you have these disparate areas, and then maybe you want to have a little kind of wildlife area over in this corner. So what you can now do is you can create separate rooms here using this as the general structure. You want something that's going to draw your eye down. So let's give you a little bench. Let's give you a bench here, right at the back of the garden. Give you a little bench, pretty little garden bench. Having places to sit and enjoy the view is a wonderful part of this garden. So then think about the trajectory. You're walking out, and what you can do here, let's say you really like formal structure. Let's give you a path straight down. Can be a wide path, can be a little bit narrower, but let's give you a path down the center, and then let's do a hedge of some kind. We'll do hydrangea standards, because why not? So let's do some hydrangea standards leading down the path. If you leave the heads up, they can be nice winter interest. You could also do a hedge of evergreens if you live in an area that stays really brown most of the year. But having that path, that little trajectory leading you down is going to be really, really helpful for the flow. Underneath these hydrangeas, let's say you want some ground cover, really beautiful ground cover. Let's do lamium. Sparkly, variegated lamium underneath. I think that could be really pretty. So now we just have this one long walkway. This is actually going to make your backyard seem a lot bigger, even though you're still kind of accentuating how long this walk is here. What you're doing here is you're creating this view to be really, really beautiful. Let's say you have some other shrubs on either side here, maybe some buddleia, and you want some kind of backing. You could have some evergreen interest in the back, or you could have, if you have a fence, you might want to plant something along the fence. Maybe a climber, like a hydrangea climber. I'm using a lot of hydrangeas here. Hydrangeas are great because they can tolerate a little bit more shade. So no matter what aspect you have, this could still work. Otherwise, you might want to do, some kind of an evergreen that could tolerate shade. Something like boxwood or yew are great options. So now we want to sort of think about how we're accessing these other little rooms. So you could put a little pathway through the lamium here. You could do that using little stones. Or you could just have gravel, whatever this is, if you decide to make this out of cobblestones or maybe gravel or mulch, or maybe you're making this pathway out of bricks. You could use that to kind of create these little entrances into the other rooms. So you're creating this little entrance into your lawn area here. And then what you're going to do is you're going to fill in the rest of this area with plants. For this, you can really kind of do anything that you want. If you prefer the look of shorter plants in the front and then taller plants in the back, you could do that. Or a fun thing to do would just be to go to town and make all of these plants really tall right at the front of the border so that you really feel like you're enclosed in here in this lawn area. That could be really, really fun. If this is for dogs, just make sure that if your dogs enjoy eating your plants, you're not putting anything poisonous in this area like monkshood or foxgloves or things like that in case they eat them. Although apparently that's not something that happens very often. It's not a very common thing, but just be mindful of that if you're planting that for your beloved furry friends. Let's say you want this to be an area that's very peaceful, that's just kind of for play, and it doesn't need to be that exciting in terms of the plants. You could have cannas and bananas here, big, bold leaves and things like that, but not too much interest. So you could do a monoculture here. You could do something, you could do a bunch of different shrubs. You could do buddleia. You could do maybe all of this is baptisia. You could do things that are just kind of all the same, but that are creating a nice little environment here, a cozy little spot for you to hang out in your lawn with your little furry friend. So then over here, we're going to create a little path that goes out on either side of our bench here. Then from this area, as you turn, you're seeing whatever this feature is in the center of your vegetable patch on this side to the left. So you're seeing the urn or the fountain or this planter here in the center. That's the thing that's drawing you this way as you come out. And then on this side, let's say you have this wildflower meadow, right? So let's say from about this second hydrangea all the way back, you have a wildflower meadow. And you can do a wildflower mix. And then you can even do some annuals that you put in there every year, like cosmos and things like that. But let's say you have a pretty little wildlife meadow over here. And then maybe you have a couple of shrubs in the back. And then here, let's say you have your compost behind the shrubs in the back corner of your garden. That would be a great place for your compost. Little compost. Let's say you make it out of maybe old pallets or something like that that you've found in your area. You have some shrubs around it. And let's say you have some other wildlife shrubs on the side. Buddleia, again, butterfly bush is great for attracting wildlife. A lot of hydrangeas are great for attracting pollinators. Weigela is great for hummingbirds. We could do elderberry. We could do, maybe we want to do an evergreen. So we're doing some arbs. Maybe we're doing some holly, something like that. But you just want to have an easy way to kind of access the compost, maybe along the side. Hopefully that's clear. Wildlife mix here. Wildflower mix here, and then maybe a few annuals that you've plugged in. And yeah, I think that's a pretty little corner. Let's say around here, around our dining garden area, this is where you're going to be sitting and really looking. So maybe you want things here that are going to be very, very interesting. So this is sort of your traditional kind of borders. Let's create really beautiful kind of undulating borders here like this. Let's separate this from the wildflower meadow with a few shrubs in the back. So let's say you'll have a few shrubs here, just kind of coming around. You don't want it to be too kind of dramatic, so it looks like a straight line, but something like that. Very soft, very gentle. You could do some roses. That could be a really nice backdrop for both of those areas, especially if you're in an area where the roses keep their leaves all year or have beautiful hips. That could be a great winter interest aspect. And then let's make this area perennials in the front of the border that are really interesting and beautiful. And let's kind of alternate. So let's do maybe a Nepeta, maybe a sedum, maybe Russian sage, Nepeta, sedum, Russian sage. Let's sort of repeat those in the front. Or, let's say you love hosting in the evening, and so you want to create a moonlight or a twilight garden. You're going to be wanting to think about things that are at their most fragrant and at their brightest at the end of the day in the twilight. So colors that are perfect for this garden are whites, ivories, creams, soft purples. Purples are really great for this. They show up really well. Any light colors. So if you wanted to focus on ivory and purple, ivory and indigo, that could be a great way to create and develop this garden. You could have beautiful things like we talked about Nepeta, Russian sage are both in that color family. You could do ivory halo dogwoods kind of as the shrub in the back area. They've got great winter interest as well. So that could be the shrub of choice in the back. And because let's say you have a window here, let's say you have a little window here for the kitchen and you wanted to just have some kind of interest. You want to keep these plants, let's say a little bit on the shorter side so that they are not going to be taking over the window. So some perennials that don't get super tall right there. Could be a really beautiful way of using this garden space to the best advantage. Here in between, you could have this mulched. You could have a little, maybe a hedge of something dividing this. Something that doesn't look like a hedge. Maybe you could do just some really beautiful elderberries, serviceberries, something like that in between, some hazel, something like that kind of divides these two areas. So you're creating rooms, but actually when you're looking at the whole thing, it's not going to look like quadrants. It's just going to look very fluid, very, very natural. So that's one way of doing it, especially if you like more formality in a garden. This is going to have a very formal feel to it, but you're still going to get the benefit of that wildlife garden in that quadrant. So here's another option if you wanted it to feel more loose and very cottagey. Let's say same family, right? We're dealing with someone who, let's say it's somebody who likes to entertain a lot, likes to, but really wants to have a vegetable patch and wants to be able to entertain outside and also wants to encourage wildlife into the garden. So same little rectangular back garden space. The house is here again. The entrance is in the center. Beautiful. So let's say for this one, instead of creating this hallway right down the center, let's say we create, maybe we can keep that table and chairs in the same spot. So maybe we've got that dining table and chairs, because let's say we want it right near the house, right near the kitchen, okay? That one has more people around it. So we've got that little area there. And then let's say we want this corner here to be a wildlife pond. So we have a cool little wildlife pond there. So you can maybe hear the water moving. Maybe you got a little bit of movement from a little bit of a waterfall area here. This can be very, very simple. Maybe there's even just a solar fountain in the center, something like that. But maybe you have some movement to the water. Let's say you have your vegetable patch. Let's say your kitchen is right here. So let's say you want to have your vegetable patch right here. So let's put your vegetable patch right here. And let's say you have your same little fun thing in the center. You could do an arch somewhere. Then let's say in this corner you want to have, you have kids, you love to do, you have a fire pit. Let's say you got a little fire pit out here. You got yourself a little bench. You got your little table and chairs. You've got bench, couple of chairs. You got your little fire pit out here. Perfect. Boom, boom, boom. Right in the back, you want to have your greenhouse. You've always wanted a greenhouse. And there you have it. There's your greenhouse in the back. In the back of the greenhouse is where you're going to keep your compost. You have a little area back there, or maybe you're going to keep it on this side over here by the wildlife area. You don't probably want it near your dining, and you don't probably want it here. So let's put it somewhere in the back here, okay? Far enough away from the house. Those are the kind of basic features. Let's say you got a couple of borders around the greenhouse. Some flowers around the greenhouse. Maybe you have some pretty annuals that you like to put in there. Maybe there's a couple of windows here, and then you have some window boxes. Who knows? You've got a fun little spot that you can kind of create a really nice view from the house. So now instead of creating this straight line and then dividing off of it the way we did here, we're going to create a really beautiful path that kind of meanders around, but we're going to give you options. So we're going to take this path this way and then all the way here. So let's bring the path out this door. It's going to meander around this way, meander over to the wildlife pond. It's going to meander over this way. It's going to let you off here, and then it's going to come out over here. And let's say there's a little arch here as an entrance into the veggie patch. So then you have your garden design here. What you can do is you could have a little sort of stepping stone pathway that feels a little bit more secret coming out of this path. So you still have a nice view right when you walk out. And let's say you've got maybe some trees here. Maybe you've got some trees that don't grow huge, but maybe you've got a couple of maybe cherries or crab apples here that are a little bit farther apart. Actually, you want to give them enough space, but depending on how big they get, maybe you have a couple of cherry trees, really pretty spring interest. Maybe you've planted some bulbs at the base of them. Maybe you've got this whole area is kind of more ground covers on either side there, so that you're really able to sort of see this area. And then maybe you've got your stepping stones leading there. And then you want to just sort of think about filling in the spaces around the path and the areas. And you can do this depending on how you want this to come across. Do you want this to feel like a cozy little potager garden that's totally secret, your little veg garden by your kitchen? Do you want to do a knot garden and design it differently without vegetable beds? Depends. You can do anything you want, but here you can do, if you want it to feel a little bit more private, do a hedge of something. You could do some hazel, could be really fun, or willow hedge there could be really, really beautiful. Here you could start to create the paths here, creating a border all along here with really beautiful perennials. And then you want to garden all of this, obviously, all of this. You can keep this a little bit on the smaller side, just so you can look out and see the dining garden from maybe this window here, the same window that you've got. You want to be able to look out, so this can be kind of smaller. Maybe you can even plant a couple of shrubs on either side of the window to kind of frame it as you're looking from the dining garden. Maybe the dining garden is really beautiful perennial garden. And then maybe around your really gorgeous, fun, little magical greenhouse or garden shed, maybe you have all your annuals planted around there. And then around your wildlife garden, you have things, we talked about all these, but serviceberry, buddleia, all kinds of things that, like wildlife is going to be really attracted to. Sedum, hydrangeas, milkweed, butterfly weed. You could plant all kinds of stuff here. But this isn't really about what you're going to be planting or your specific environment. This is just about kind of coming up with ideas of how you can use your space. So let's say this area you're creating kind of a little bit more of a wild feel to it, but it's very, very beautiful because it's all framing this gorgeous wildlife pond that you have here. If you put water in your garden, wildlife will come. Then you've got this beautiful little area, this little spot here. And then let's say around your fire pit, you want to be really safe. So you've got gravel down, and let's say you've got a decent amount of space around that fire pit there. And let's say we're keeping some shrubs, but they're going to be farther away. Maybe some perennials or some shrubs. Maybe like we talked about the dogwoods on this side. Maybe we're doing some ivory halo dogwoods and some evergreens back here, so that in the winter months you can come back here, have a fire going, and be surrounded by winter interest. So let's put dogwoods and some evergreens all around. Or maybe you've got some boxwood topiary back there. Hey, who knows? The topiary is going to be more high maintenance. If you just chuck some boxwoods in, those are going to be low maintenance. And those are also going to have interest year round. So there we go. So these are different options that you can do for the same kind of general backyard garden. Very standard, just using the perimeter to plant. More formal, straight, and creating distinguished rooms. And then this one is more fluid, feels more cottagey in a way, very fluid, kind of moving garden. There we have it. So these are just a few basic ideas that I wanted to share with you. Please let me know if you have any specific questions about garden design, anything else that you'd like me to create a video for. If you're interested in cottage garden design specifically, that's really what I love to do, is cottage garden design. Please let me know, and also let me know what kind of problems you face in your area. There are always going to be problems, and my one encouragement to you is just to embrace them. Embrace the problems in your garden, because that's really where your creativity is going to come to life. Thank you so much for joining me. Like this video if you like, subscribe if you're not already. I'll see you in the next one.